And that is a scoreline where you probably would look at that and go, okay, we're just not going to win this game. There is no way. We'd have to score every single goal as a super shot in order to try and bring that
I
back.
mean, predictable is probably the word that I want to use. And
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't failed us yet, other than the Constellation Cup last year, which we'll just put in a little corner and pretend didn't happen.
No,
Um,
we're fully remembering that happened. The exemption process, I really do think that we can't just let everyone leave, because once several of our world class players leave, then there's no ANZ Premiership to be had, basically. Well, kia ora, Netball Scoop whānau, and welcome back to the Netball Scoop YouTube channel. My name is Tobey, and in today's video, we're here to dissect these two amazing finals games that we had over the weekend, and to think of how quite unexpected, I guess, the results ended up being. I think we thought that one game was going to be a blowout, and that was the close game. And then we had potentially the game that we thought was going to be close ended up being a screaming blowout. So, Georgia, what are your thoughts about the games on the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, like you've said, they were two very different finals. I don't think we've probably had two finals that have been so different in a final series since the Super Netball started. And yeah, as we both mentioned in our video last week, we were both expecting the Fever to win, which happened, but we also
Mm.
both tipped Thunderbirds to come out on top, which Vixens were like, nope, we're not gonna let that happen. And were dominant for the whole game, and yeah, have given themselves another week where they'll be coming up against the Swifts to see who then gets to meet the Fever, which I think is probably a job that, while they'd both obviously love to be in the grand final, I think they'd also both be shaking in their boots a little bit given the performance that Fever had over the weekend.
And I think as well, especially that they're two teams that have been quite inconsistent this season. So I guess we'll delve into that a little bit later. But also, if you are tuning in, we will also be dissecting that Australian Diamond squad later in the video, and which was announced a couple of hours ago, which is that new player exemption from New Zealand. So we'll kind of dissect all of that international news as well. So definitely stick around. But let's start off with that first game we had, which was the Adelaide Thunderbirds and the Melbourne Vixens in Adelaide, where you were there. Kind of what were your thoughts on the ground, and also what did you see that was going really well for the Vixens?
Yeah, I mean, well, Vixens led pretty much the entire game. They won
Mm,
the first quarters, and then Thunderbirds came back at them in the last, but it wasn't quite by enough. I think the player that really set the tone for me, which is someone that I know you talked about in one of our earlier videos this year, I think it might have been our mid-season review, was Keddy. She was
mm,
phenomenal. She was tasked with coming up against Georgie Horges, who, as we know, is one of the best wing attacks in the world at the moment, was named the Suncorp Super Netball Player of the Year last year, and then went on to make her Diamond debut. And without a doubt, is one of the Thunderbirds' most important players as that playmaker down in the attacking end. Had her on wing attack in the first half of the game. Then when Georgie switched over to goal attack, Simone was like, "Nah, we're keeping Keddy over there," and shifted her over
mm.
to stick with her at goal defence. And she had two gains in that first quarter, and Vixens ended up winning by two. So obviously lots of other moments happened in between then, but I think the pressure that she was able to put on Horges, force a lot of sort of scrappy play in that attacking end, really went a
Mm.
long way at just setting that tone, giving the Vixens that edge early. And as we know, the Thunderbirds like to lead. It's not very often that they come back and draw back a lead. They like to be in front and push out and make teams chase them. So I think the fact that they were the ones having to do the chasing this week, just meant that, yeah, it was a bit too much of a job for them.
Yeah, I think definitely their defense end was quite amazing this weekend. And to think they're not a team that actually does get a lot of gains. And I think obviously, yeah, my first note was actually talking about Keddy too. I think she was phenomenal. I think she just like jumped into the attacking gaps that were not only forced by the Vixens and what they were setting up, but also the Thunderbirds went, oh, okay, we finally got a gap. Let's place the ball there and give it to Horges or the goal attack, Lauren Fruit, and Kate Eddy was all over it. So definitely she was a standout for me. But I also think that for the probably the first time this season, there was a lack of turnovers in there. attacking end. And I know that last week I was a bit brutal about how I talked about it, but it was awesome to see their shooter to shooter play actually work. They put the ball over the Thunderbirds defense, which not many teams are very confident in doing. But they were also patient, all four members of that attacking end, including Zara Walters, who probably has never started in a final series before. Just thinking that she had a major opportunity with Hannah Mundy injured, and she relished the opportunity. I think she did a really good job. And yeah, I think Garvin really stood up against Matilda Garrett. And I think Kira Austin was definitely all over Latanya Wilson this week.
Yeah, for sure. I think they really relished the fact that Shamira Sterling-Humphrey wasn't in that goal circle, as we saw a bit of trouble against the Thunderbirds, particularly in that first game of the year, the grand final rematch. They just got
Mm.
absolutely spooked. And I think I'd flagged last week that, yeah, Kira Austin was probably going to be the player that was going to decide the game. If she showed up with that same form that she did in the grand final last year that almost dragged them over the line, that they were going to be in with a red hot crack. And yeah, she finished with 5 from 5 super shots. She had no turnovers across the whole 60 minutes. And yeah, I think it was always going to be a toss up between her and Kate Eddy for the player of the match. I personally think it probably should have gone to Kate Eddy. As we know, wing defenses always get underappreciated in that sort of sense. But
Mm.
yeah, I think both of them went a long way into deciding the game. And we've actually got some audio from the post-match press conference chatting to Simone about the connection and the play that Sophie Garvin and Kira Austin had. So let's have a little listen to that.
I'm proud of them. I'm proud of them every week, and I know that there's people that may be ups and downs, but I'm proud of them every week because they get out there every week and do it. And that's part of at elite sport. You have your ups and downs, but they're champions. They're world champions, actually, and they stood up. I'm super proud of them, and I'd have them in my team any day of the week.
Well, I think it just sums up kind of the Vixens, I guess, in that game, really. That
Mm.
practically, they've had a pretty inconsistent season. I mean, they're losing against teams that they shouldn't be losing against, and then they're winning against teams that they probably shouldn't be winning against. So they've been a bit all over the place, and I think, a lot of their team are from that 2023 Netball World Cup team, and they should have been performing probably at this kind of level throughout the season. And I think to at least bring it out during this game, I think is really important and will give them a lot of confidence going into next week's game against the Swifts. I mean, they are world champions, and they should have been performing like this. And I think having Sophie and Kira, someone that a connection that has been quite, there's been a lot of criticism for them this season, and they stood up when it counted, and they proved me wrong when I said they haven't shown that they've been big time players for this season, and they were. So I think they should have all the confidence in the world going into next week's game, and they've just got to be clinical like they were this week, and also make sure that they generate turnovers like they did.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be hoping for almost a repeat performance from the attacking end heading into next week. I think their defensive end probably still has a little bit of work to do. They didn't win a
Mm.
whole heap of ball back. They tended to more sort of force the Thunderbirds into errors, and they did have quite high penalties as well. Particularly Rudy Ellis was quite expensive on that front, which, as we know, has been sort of a bit of a theme for her throughout the year. But I think she was just lucky to get out on court in the end because, as we saw at the very start of the game, she took a bit of a straight elbow from Joe Weston to the eye and had to quickly rush off to the medic team and get all patched up and ready to go. I've seen a bit of footage on her Instagram today of a big egg right on her eye. So hopefully that's all cleared up and she'll be fit and firing, ready to go next week. But yeah, no doubt that caused a bit of a shake among the Vixens camp. Only what was it? I think about 10 or 15 minutes before play started.
For sure. And I mean, let's go into that second game, the Fever versus the Swifts.
Mm.
This was the blowout of all blowouts. I mean, I don't think I knew, we both predicted that the Fever were going to win that game. And I think we both knew that they were going to be quite, the gap will be quite big. But we thought
Mm.
maybe, 10 goals. not
Yeah, if
what
I had
it
to put
is.
money on it, I would have said, yeah, about 10, maybe 15 on a good day for the Fever or bad day for the Swifts. But yeah, in
Yeah,
no way I think anybody predicting a 32-goal win, which is the biggest win that we've seen in a final series since Super Netball started. That eclipsed the win that the Thunderbirds had over the Vixens in the major semi-final last year, which was 25 goals. So what
yeah.
was your initial assessment of the game?
Yeah, well, I think starting off the game with an 8-2 lead will set up a team practically with any kind of success. I mean, it was the offensive contacts from Grace, poor passes from Helen and Verity that were kind of just being shoved in because the Fever defense end were absolutely smothering. And I think a big part of that was not only the encircled defense of Katie Ann and Sunday completely overworking their opposites. I mean, Katie Ann was forcing Grace into really bad like body positioning. You could see that Grace was almost not holding enough or turning away from the hold too early, or it was just like I've never seen Grace have a game like that in a very long time. So that was quite interesting. And I think it was good competition for her. I think she'll definitely learn from that. And I think Sunday was incredible over Helen. I think, Helen's usually that playmaker that we all know that loves to have the ball in hand, but Sunday really limited those opportunities. I think she read what kind of play they were going to do, and she almost allowed them to think that the ball could go into Helen, and she was all over it. She used her footwork really nicely and got a lot of gains. I think it was 7 in the end. So I think she should be really proud of what she did. But I think, yeah, it was the whole team effort. I think 7 players were on defense, 7 players were on attack, and that went from the first second to the absolute last second of the game. And I think they should be really proud of what they did, the Fever. Um, and I did notice on attack as well that the Swifts were really bunched up on one side, and that's never going to work against a team like the Fever, who are so quick, so fast, and so adaptable to whatever kind of attacking structure is going up against them. So, yeah, definitely was a very interesting game for them. But I think as well, the Fever attack end was just absolutely incredible. I think Janelle made the Swifts defense look like absolute rookies despite the experience in there. I think she stood strong all night, and her ability to just be a major presence opened a lot of space up for Alice to do hard drives into that pocket and onto that circle edge, which means easy feeds into her. Um, I think Shanice also used her speed really well against Maddie Turner. I think there was a lot of times where Shanice was almost by herself, and so she could just act as a third feeder. I don't think she shot a goal. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down. She shot her first goal 23 minutes into the game or 22 minutes into the game. So to have that ability to not shoot a goal for that long as a goal attack, but still be ahead by more than 20 goals is incredible. And I think, that first half, it was colossal 46-20. And that is a scoreline where you probably would look at that and go, okay, we're just not going to win this game. There is no way. We'd have to score every single goal as a super shot in order to try and break that back. I would like to do a special mention to Jordan Kranzberg. I think she was incredible. I think she was everywhere, whether she was in a center or wing attack. I think defensively she placed herself in the right positions to almost disrupt that inexperience of the Swiss midcourt. And on attack, I think she had a ball on the thread to the Fever shooters. So definitely a major game for her. In the end, as you mentioned, 77-45, biggest finals blowout in the competition. And I think there was just some key stats I'd like to bring up. So 18 gains for the Fever versus 7 for the Swifts. I mean, that is a massive achievement for that Fever defense end. But also the Swifts turning over the ball 37 times versus the Fever turning it over 19. So I think the Swifts probably, Dylan and Bryony probably have about 3 notebooks of what they kind of need to do in order to stop not only the Fever when they potentially may face them in the grand final, but to make sure that they're kind of consistent next week against the Vixens.
Yeah, I'm sure that long flight back to from Perth to Sydney would have felt even longer for all of them. I've got
Oh
no
God,
doubt that
yeah.
Bryony and Dylan were probably in their own little aisle together, swimming through their notebooks, spending the whole time analysing everything. But you've got to wonder, yes, it was obviously I think it's fairly safe to say, an atrocious game from the Swifts. So
Yeah.
how long are they going to actually dwell on that? Are they going to wallow in it, talk about how crappy it was, or are they just going to have to move along? Because if they get stuck dwelling in that for too long, you've got to worry about their ability to then shift focus to the next game. And they've got a good record against the Vixens, who they'll be facing this week. They've won one game and lost one game, so it's really could be anyone's game this week. So yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to see how they bounce back from such a demoralising loss. They do have the advantage of being back in with their home crowd this week, which will be really good for them. But you've got the Vixens, riding on a high, who they would have fully believed that they could win the game against the Thunderbirds, but not a lot of other people did. So I think they'll be coming in from really different mindsets, which does always happen in this prelim final. You've obviously got one team coming off a loss and one team coming off a win. But yeah, I think it'll be a bit of mind games going into this week's game. And I feel like if the Swifts can't get a strong start, knowing that that was what really let them down this week, then I think they'll potentially be in trouble again.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting because they do have the return of Paige Hadley this week, as announced during the press conference that it was basically just precautionary, because they knew that they did have that backup chance of being in that prelim final just to give her a bit of a rest for her injury. So having her back will be crucial for their midcourt. I think that was a major area where they just keep switching people around and that never really works out. I guess, having Verity come on about 3 or 4 different times in different positions, and then having 3 or 4 different centers, it just doesn't create that flow, that consistency. And I think out of all the options, though, I think Shani Lambden was probably their best. I think she was a good defensive presence. I think she also, had a bit of flair on her feed as well. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised if this week they just see that Verity or Grace White isn't performing in that wing attack position, actually shifting Paige into wing attack and maybe Shani into centre could be an option. But definitely the prelim final is definitely going to be interesting to see what Swift's team turns up. Because I think if we see the team that was, round 1 versus round 8, I think they will defeat the Vixens for sure. But if we see this really inconsistent team that doesn't necessarily look like it's clicking or just something is very off, and I can't actually quite pinpoint it, to be honest. It just looks frazzled. It looks like they couldn't get any defensive ball. But yeah, so that's a major concern for me.
All right, well, let's put you on the spot then. Which of the two teams do you think are going to come away with it? And if you had to pick a player of the match, who do you reckon it's going to be?
So for the prelim final, I think it will possibly be, I'm going to go Swifts. I think that Grace has had a pretty good tussle with Rudy Ellis and their defensive end before. I think Helen will hopefully be fired up to really show what she's capable of doing, which we know she is a phenomenal player. And I think that the Swiss defensive end works a lot better up against a more moving circle. So I think Maddie Turner will be able to bring herself in a little bit more. I think Sarah Clow will have almost that good reach over Sophie Garvin, which we know she doesn't really like someone being taller than her, as seen with her other tussles with Sarah, but also her tussles with Kelly Jackson. So, but it'll be interesting to see who the Swiss bring in, because I think if they can bring in another defender, and that's not a slight on the training partner that they ended up bringing in, but she's not a goalkeeper, goal defense that can really shut down those world-class players. She's still developing. Is it Schneiderman? Is that right?
Yeah, Freddie Schneiderman.
Freddie Schneiderman. So yeah, definitely. If they can try and source someone to come in like obviously now we know that Kelly Jackson is available, so I think they'll be putting the hope and prayers that they can find someone that has experience shutting down that attacking end to come in and make an impact when things aren't working. But yeah, I think Swifts will win. It will be a close game, and I think the player of the match is going to be Paige Hadley.
I think, yeah, Paige coming back into that side is certainly going to do them wonders. And something that was interesting that came up in the press conference is obviously we know that all season people have been comparing Grace Nweke and Janelle Fowler-Nemad, the two most dominant goal shooters that we've got in the league at the moment. So let's just have a little listen to this bit of audio here from Bryony about the game that Grace played on the weekend.
No, not at all. I feel like she's 23. I think people forget that she's a 23-year-old out there. She's not 33, she's not 28, she's 23, playing in her first season of SSN. So she's where she is at the moment. She wouldn't be happy with her performance. She wants 50 goals plus, but that's not reality in the world's best netball sometimes. So I'll back her all the way. There's nothing physically wrong with her. She'll learn. I think watch out next week for people because she'll come back.
I think there's a real sense of sort of Bryony's like mama bear instinct in just the tenacity in her voice in that interview. You can really hear that she's very, very defensive. As we've said, Grace is only 23. We've got these such high expectations of her because she's been so dominant in New Zealand for so long and then been so dominant for the Ferns. We expect her to all of a sudden come over here and play at the level of someone like a Janelle Fowler-Nemad, and that's just not going to happen. So yeah, I think a test of her maturity over the next week before that next game is going to really come down to how she bounces back from this tough game that she had, as we said, the 5 or 6 turnovers, lots of missed shots and all that sort of stuff. So I think, yeah, a real test for her is going to be how she's able to bounce back from that and then perform in now what is a do or die game for them.
Yeah, and I think that kind of quote really does prove that she has been at such a steady rise because to think that this season she is the second best shooter in the competition. It's just that Janelle, when you look at them, when one team is just firing and you just see why, because Janelle is such a strong presence. That's something that, Grace, obviously her game is slightly different from Janelle, but she'll be looking at Janelle and going, this is what I need to do in order to make my game go up to the next level. And I think, with the players that she's around her, not only at SSN, but also at international, she'll just continue to grow and grow and grow. So, no, definitely agree with that sentiment that Bryony said. And also, it will be a very interesting game coming up this weekend to see, yeah, as you said, that maturity level and that mental strength to see if she can, come up against a Jo Weston who will be wanting to frustrate her and Rudy Ellis and see how she goes.
For sure. Well, speaking of Grace Nweke, as we said at the top of the show, only in the last, probably 5 or 6 hours from before we're recording this, we had that sort of exciting, controversial, I don't know what sort of news you want to call it, probably exciting for you guys. I'm sure there's a few New Zealand players that are saying, why couldn't you have announced this 6 months earlier? Then we could have played in Australia this year. But yeah, the news that they have reviewed the eligibility criteria to play for the Ferns and have announced that there's going to be an official exemption process that players can go through if they do want to play overseas. And by the sounds of it, that's going to come into effect immediately. So potentially we could see Grace suiting up in the black dress for the test series coming up towards the end of the year. What were your thoughts when you first heard the news as a Kiwi?
Imagine I said I was disappointed. Of course, I'm excited for it. I guess I don't want there to be a floodgates kind of approach to it, though. I think there has to be some sort of requirement in there to be like, basically, this is for the world-class players to develop their game to another level. And Nolene Totoa commented on it that she only believes that the Silver Ferns kind of have one world-class player, which I think we all assume is Grace Nweke. But I think, there's definitely players on the fringe that going over to the SSN would grow their game and would bring them up to that next level. I think someone like Kelly Jackson, she's definitely on the fringes of that world-class level, as we saw during the international series. I think Amelia Anacanacio would be a great option for a team like the Firebirds or somewhere along those, like the Mavericks as well, just having that strong goal attack, that consistent goal attack. A Kate Heffernan, I think, would be amazing in there, and Maddie Gordon. But like, there's a lot of talent over in New Zealand, and I think, as we saw during that Constellation Cup, when they string it together, they are a very, very dominant team. It's just having that, I guess, that experience consistently to be at that world-class level will only make them better and better. But yeah, the exemption process, I really do think that we can't just let everyone leave, because once, several of our world-class players leave, then there's no ANZ premiership to be had, basically, based on how fragile at the moment that broadcaster deal is. And we necessarily don't even have enough players to fill our 16 competition anyway, so that will probably have to get smaller if this happens. So I do hope that as this gets announced, there'll be a few more guidelines so that it's a bit more publicly available as to kind of how that process works, because it's not specific. Basically, they've just announced that they want to open it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky time, and I think probably the timing of it is potentially what's put people out a little bit, because as we know, New Zealand are going to struggle without someone like Grace. Amelia's Wormsley's obviously had a great season over in the ANZ, but as you said, heading off to the World Youth Cup most likely, which is happening in September. So I think, the main issue that people have probably taken with it is there were probably a few of those players, most of which you mentioned beforehand, that would have been looking over in Australia at the start of the season. They've now missed out on that 6-month period to be playing out here, and they've sort of gone, oh crap, we're not going to have Grace, we need to change the rules now, and then everyone else has sort of missed out on that opportunity. So hopefully, we know there's a fair few players that are off contract in the Super Netball heading into season 2026, so it's going to open plenty of opportunity for some of those players to come over here and snag contracts. And I think, like you said, especially given the fact that we do know there's a bit of sort of uncertainty, I guess is probably the word, around the New Zealand broadcast deal as well. I know the bottom of the article that I read that included all this information did say that for 2026, the current form of the ANZ Premiership is going to be continuing, which is the 6 teams with the 10-round season plus finals. But beyond there's really not sure what's going on. But that's also the same time that the Australian broadcast deal expires as well. So there's then potential for there a big shake-up, whether it be some New Zealand teams coming over here to join the competition, or more of a just general Australian expansion. We'll just have to wait and see what plays out there.
Yeah, and to think that that wasn't the only international news that's come out this week. We've also had the Australian Diamond Squad get announced. So, quick little overview. So we have Sunday Ariang, Kira Austin, Courtney Bruce, Sophie Dwyer, Ash Irvin, Sophie Garbin, Matilda Garrett, Paige Hadley, Georgie Horgis, Sarah Clow, Cara Conan, Kate Maloney, Hannah Mundy, Amy Parmenter, Jamie Lee Price, Alice Tigneal, Liz Watson, and Joe Weston in that main squad. And then we've also got as invitees Lucy Austin, Tegan O'Shannessy, who has a injury replacement of Erin O'Brien, Amy Sliger, and Danelle Wallum. So, where do we start with that squad? I mean, you probably have a lot more favourable reviews of it than probably I might. So you start off. How do you feel about the squad?
Yeah, I mean, predictable is probably the word that I want to use.
Yeah.
And I mean, it hasn't failed us yet, other than the Constellation Cup last year, which we'll just put in a little corner and pretend didn't happen.
No, we're fully remembering that happened.
But yeah, I mean, you're not going to reinvent the wheel. Stacey's had proven success with the majority of that squad, so of course you're gonna keep it the same. I think the two big talking points out of that main squad is the inclusion of Alice Tigneal. It's her first call-up. She was an invitee last year and by all accounts performed really well at the camp that they had, and then has earned herself her first major call-up. And as we've said, Janelle was sort of the big story of the West Coast Fever, with them coming back when she returned, but she can only score as many goals as balls she gets provided, and that's a massive job that Alice Tigneal, as well as Jordan Kransberg, who we've also raved about today, That's a massive part of their job, and her consistency over the last few years is one that is, I think, really to be admired. And yes, we can say, it's all well and good to feed Janelle, she's 6'20" and you just chuck the ball up and she'll get it. But knowing how much of the game plan of every other team coming against the Fever can't rely on shutting down Fallon Emmard, because that's never going to happen. Everybody knows you can't win that one-on-one battle with her. So you've got to do the work at the front. That's what literally every team says going into a game against the Fever. And that work out the front goes against Alice Teague-Neal. She's the main ball deliverer into Janelle. So I think her ability to continuously do that, knowing that she is probably a key target of everybody's game plan, and she's able to show up week in, week out and do that, I think it's really nice to see her rewarded. And Dan Ryan had some very similar sentiment to share in the press conference. So let's have a listen to that audio.
So proud of Alice. I think she's a great example of persistence in high-performance sport, and just chipping away and taking on feedback and just finding different ways where she can keep evolving. And I think, she's only had 4 seasons playing wing attack in her entire life, and she's now, arguably one of the best wing attacks in the world. And she's got a real understated way of just slowly growing her game and getting better and better. And each season she's played with us in the past 4 years, it's been better and better. And her ability just to grow her game, but also lead us, has been brilliant in that front line. And it's a great reward for consistency. I think consistency is something that's really probably undervalued at times, and you just know when you're coaching Alice, she's going to get a job done, she's going to take care of business, and she'll find a way when she's challenged. So we're all very, very proud of her, and she's very deserving of those accolades.
So yeah, I think that obviously, echoes everything that we've said, and Alice Teague-Neal is one of those players that lots of people have been calling for an inclusion in the Diamonds for the last couple of years. And then I think the other probably discussion point that's come up in terms of the main squad, and then we'll shift on to the invitees in a moment, is the inclusion of Amy Parmenter. I think there's lots of people who are probably fairly vocal about the fact that she hasn't had her best season to date, and I think that's probably something that has been recognised internally within the Mavericks environment as well. There's been plenty of other wing defences who have had strong seasons, not only in their ability to shut down opposition players, but also their ability to win ball. Players like Keddy and Amy Sliger jump out at me as players that have had particularly consistent and strong seasons in that sense. So yeah, I think particularly knowing that, yes, Palmy's been in the Diamonds environment before, had a couple of chances and hasn't quite been able to nab onto that wing defence bib with any sort of gusto, I guess. They tend to prefer to play both Jamie Lee Price and Kate Maloney on court, even though neither of them typically play a lot of wing defence in the regular season. So yeah, I think her inclusion was one that probably had a few of us a little bit surprised, especially knowing that, as we've said, someone like Amy Sliger had a really strong, particularly second half of the season, with that leadership of Casey Corpwood behind her, and that's the sort of leadership that someone like an Amy Sliger would get if she was to come into the Diamonds environment. So really nice to see she's been included as an invitee. But yeah, I think Amy Parmenter is probably one that was potentially not on a lot of people's lists to make it into the squad. So what are your thoughts on just that initial squad of 18 that we've just talked about, Tobey?
Yeah, I think as you said, it's consistent. I think it's predictable, and I think it just, to me, it's almost just lacking something, a little bit of flavor or a little bit of youth, or I think like I've just wrote it down over here before anyone slights me for what I'm looking at. I've separated into the 3 sections. So like I look at that shooting end of Austin, Garvin, Conan, and Dwyer making that main squad. To me, I just remember like the international series, once those 4 almost had a lot of pressure on them, especially that goal attack position was always a huge thing in commentary and by the media, where if Kira Austin is off and Sophie Dwyer, who was quite inconsistent last international season, went off, it was just like, what do you do? And it's almost like you want to have that third option, which I guess you can bring up a Georgie Horgis into that position, but I know that they're really wanting to emphasize her importance and at wing attack to, bring them for the future. So I think trying to refrain from using her as that goal attack swing is going to be kind of important for her international development. So I would have loved if they had a goal attack in their invitees, which I know we'll talk about in a minute, who we would probably replace. But I think also Donnell Wallen probably does deserve a spot in that main squad. I think she's been really impressive this season with the Mystics. Obviously, it is a different competition, but there's a reason why she was sent over there, and Netball Australia told her the guidelines she probably needed to meet, and I genuinely would believe that based on her performances this season, she definitely has met them. She's gone up against the New Zealand defenders for the first time and is absolutely, taken charge of players like Kelly Jackson and Jane Watson, players that Garvin and Conan haven't necessarily did last season. So just having someone that has that experience already over New Zealand would have been good. I do look at that mid-court as well, and obviously there's a lot of talent, but some of them also haven't been necessarily performing to their highest level, so it'll be interesting to see who gets in that main 4 players or 5 players, depending on how they pick it, for the Constellation Cup and that South Africa series. I think, like a Liz Watson hasn't been at her best this season, but she's definitely that experienced head. So I'm really hoping that, looking at that, a lot of opportunities, hopefully, for Paige Hadley and Jamie Lee Price and potentially Georgie Horgis as well, for a lot of game time just to prove themselves and also show that they are currently the best players in their positions. Defensively, I also go back to the argument of the ball winners. And I think there's Sunday Ariang. I think she's a major ball winner. But the rest of the players on there necessarily this season, maybe Ash Irvin, but like Courtney Bress has had a bit of an up and down season. So has Joe Weston. And also we've just come off that performance from Sarah Clow against Janelle. So yeah, to me, it's just not as excited, but maybe that's the New Zealander of me. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about the invitee, someone like Donnell Wallen, who was only on that invitee list, I think that surprised a lot of people, especially when you then look at the other person who's been included on the invitee list, which was Lucy Austin, who we've spoken a little bit about so far this year, and there has been a lot of chat about her in the general media as well. She's played 25 minutes of SSN this year. And that, to me, is just a little bit wild, I guess, that she's still able to earn an invite to a Diamonds camp off only 25 minutes of Super Netball court time. Yes, we've obviously had the reserves competition that's been running this year, and she's been playing in that. And then the last couple of weeks, I know she's been playing in the Premier League state competition based here in Adelaide as well. But there's no way that either of those are anywhere near the level of the Super Netball competition, let alone the level of the Diamonds competition. So I think that was probably one that surprised us. But in the press conference after the Adelaide game on Sunday afternoon, Tanya did have a few words to say about that. So let's have a listen.
Yeah, I think I read something where Stacey sort of said she has a different skill set. Australia has players who they have selected, but Australia doesn't necessarily have that tall holding shooter, which Lucy has that skill set. She's obviously performed in their camp in January, and we've been in constant communication with the Diamonds, not just about Lucy, but with everyone else. So, and she has been playing. I think some not getting court time here doesn't mean she's just sitting on a bench and warming the seat. She needs to keep playing, and we were able to do that through the reserves, which has been fantastic for her. And then still getting that low through now what was in Premier League. So really happy for Lucy that has happened in what has been probably not a year that she was hoping for.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So yeah, some pretty strong words there from Tanya. It was a question I asked right at the end of the press conference, and obviously it was already a tough presser to walk into, knowing that they'd obviously just been knocked out of finals. But yeah, I was really interested to get her perspective, because particularly when Lucy sort of first had those few games where she was dropped from the game day squad, the question came up about Lucy, and Tanya was so defensive. That very similar tone of voice to what we heard from Bryony earlier when she was talking about Grace. It was very much, it's just the way the game goes. We've got 11 players that we can choose. Lucy's doing everything she needs to be doing, but at the moment, based on how our team lines up, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. So yeah, I think she's obviously still very invested in her development, but I think it'll be interesting to see next year. You know, we obviously don't know if Imelda Aiken-George is planning on continuing to play next year. If she is, I think Lucy's got to move. There's no way that I think we can continue giving her this exposure to that sort of Diamonds Australian environment if she's not getting court time week in, week out, because yeah, it's not, yes, as Tanya said, there's the Premier League and there's the reserves competition, but that's not nowhere near at the same level as what she's getting at the Super Netball level when she's getting out there on court.
That was very defensive. You could tell in the tone that she was almost defending why she doesn't put her on for the Thunderbirds, and like how someone could possibly even go from reserves to then making the Diamonds. I just find that crazy, especially when you do look at, you know, their need to build up that goal attack position potentially for the future. And you have players like Lauren Frew, who has been pretty strong this season. You could also look across at someone like a Matisse Leatherbarrow. Obviously, she plays a bit more goal shooter, but she does have that flexibility of playing both positions. So it is an interesting pick. You know, once again, I'm not going to make any assumption based on all my predictions going wrong this season. So we'll see how she goes. She might be the standing goal shooter by Constellation Cup. Who knows? So let's just see how that goes. I think if we move down to, I'm going to start off with those defender invitees of Tegan O'Shannessy. Obviously, she's got that back injury, but I think she had a pretty good season. I definitely think, though, that her injury replacement of Erin O'Brien would have been the person I would have picked to be the invitee, especially even potentially making that main squad. I think she was just a major ball winner. And I think having that faith of, you know, the Australian Diamonds telling her pretty much that, you know, you did an amazing job based on your limited experience. Let's bring you into the environment. Is going to be great for her. I hope they don't just drop her, though, once Tegan is back from injury. You know what I mean? I think it would be good just to keep someone like Erin around the environment. And yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that decision of Tegan O'Shannessy versus the Erin O'Brien, which I know a lot of people online are talking about as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, they're two great young players who are coming through, and, you know, both started back at goalkeeper at the start of the season, and we obviously saw that shift of Erin O'Brien out to goal defence a little bit more in the second half of the season once Casey Corpora came along. But I think that shift almost showed just how much she has to learn and how much she can improve. She was dominating and doing really well in goalkeeper at the start of the season. Then she shifted out to goal defence, had that extra bit of leadership behind her, which is exactly what she's going to get in that Diamonds environment, similar to what I said about Amy Sligo earlier. So I think, yeah, the ability to bring her in and have that true ability to shift between goalkeeper and goal defence. I think, you know, we see Courtney Bruce do it a little bit. We see Sarah Cloud do it a little bit in that Diamonds environment, but they still never quite seem to do quite as well when they're out of position as such. They both tend to do that much better when they're back at goalkeeper, whereas I think Erin's potentially showing that she does have that ability to be a true goal defence goalkeeper slide, which we don't typically see a lot of. We tend to have those really dominant goalkeepers and then those really dominant goal defences that then swing across to wing defence. So yeah, I think that was a really good inclusion. And if anyone's wanting any more detailed information about the squad, our very own Jenny Sinclair had a chat to Stacey within a couple of days of the squad being dropped. So there's actually an article on our website that we'll make sure we link in our show notes so that you can go and check that out and see all of the inside information and some more inside details of what went into that selection and a bit of reasoning behind Stacey's decisions as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. We've obviously had a lot to cover, not only with the Super Netball matches that have happened, but also the exciting news of that Diamonds squad drop and the exciting news about the New Zealand eligibility change. Make sure you give us a follow and subscribe so that you don't miss our next couple of videos. We're going to do a few more finals wraps coming up towards the end of the season, and I think we'll probably have to look at touching base on our team of the years that we did midway through the season. It's probably time for Tobey and I to have a bit of a reevaluate, see who we'd change. And then another thing we actually touched on last week that has since come out and been published on our website as well was the best Super Netball MVP. So we both picked Latanya Wilson as our picks, but make sure you go and check out our article that will also link below so you can see what everybody else's thoughts were and who those top 5 players were across the league. But until next time, enjoy the games on the weekend, and hopefully we'll be back to chat after the next game before the grand final.